This is Capitol View with your host, Jesse Tenor.
Hey everyone, this week on Capitol View, you heard from the candidates for State House District 39. You heard a lot from incumbent Representative Mark Lowry and challenger Monica Ball on things like education and ethics. But there's a lot we weren't able to show you on TV, including their thoughts on teacher retirement plans. Here's the entire legislative forum for the candidates for House District 39 in a web exclusive. So I wanted to start off with this question just to see kind of why you wanted to get in the race in the first place. So Monica, since you haven't been on the show, I wanted to ask you first. So, you know, you're a retired teacher. What made you look at this race and say, I need to be in this one?
Well, I believe that we need someone in the State House that represents the people that elected them and puts the people's interest first instead of that of big money donors and special interests.
Representative Lowry, you're also a retired educator. You're running for your fourth term. You've been in since 2013. So how would you respond to what she was saying? And then just, yeah, why did you want to run for re-election?
Well, I've really enjoyed my time, my tenure in the legislature. I don't really feel like represent special interest. I mean, I've represented the people of Maumelle where they would like to have a future school district, pass that legislation. I've sponsored the bill on voter ID that 71% of Arkansans support according to the latest polling. So I would have to differ with that. And I look forward to the opportunity of being able to see through some of the legislation that we've passed, like productivity model funding on higher education and such. So I hope to have a fourth term.
Since your backgrounds are in education, that's of course going to be one of the biggest issues in this race, and so I wanted to get into some of the weeds on that. So first off, even in the governor's race, we're hearing about increases to teachers' salaries, but kind of the way that it seems to differ is just how to carry that out. And so I wanted to ask you both, just moving forward, do you support teacher raises, and then how you think that should be funded? Representative Lowry, let's start with you.
Well, I think we definitely have to impact the minimum teacher salary across the state. One of the problems that we have with the matrix funding is that while we provide enough money for this minimum teacher salary, I believe of $36,000, superintendents have the choice of whether they're going to use that money on salaries. So we're talking about in the adequacy committee of whether we would actually take that money outside of the matrix so that it's mandated categorically towards that. And then of course I think that we should put more money into the formula to be able to fund those school districts that are not able to provide that minimum teacher salary.
Monica, how do you think it should be funded, these teacher raises?
Well, the funding of minimum teacher salaries is fine, but it needs to flow through to the top of the salary schedule, because what ends up happening is teachers that have been there for a very long time and have a great deal of experience and additional education end up making not that much more than those that are just coming in when all we do is increase the minimum salary.
Okay. And then we recently found out that the state will take over the Pine Bluff School District, and that's the fourth district to be under state control. And so, Monica, I know that you've said that one of your main priorities is really strengthening the Arkansas public school system as a whole. How specifically would you do that, or would you ask your colleagues to do that?
Well, I would take a look at what's not working in those districts where they are low performing. I would imagine a lot of it has to do with not enough funding, not being able to attract qualified teachers. So what we need to do is strengthen those areas that they are weak in so that they can attract qualified teachers. I believe that you know, a lot of times in districts like that we end up with teachers filling the classrooms that may not be certified, and so we need to take a look at teacher training and proper preparation for the people that we're putting in the classrooms if we really are serious about improving education.
Mark, you've been a proponent of school choice. You've even sponsored some legislation along those lines as well. And so moving into 2019, what would kind of a next piece of legislation look like, since you said that your priority is ensuring that parents still get these choices for their children?
Well, I think the first thing I'd want to address is that money is not always the answer in terms of improved effectiveness of the schools. We've received statistical analysis from the Bureau of Legislative Research that there is no linkage between funding and success in making sure that our students are reading at grade level and that they're testing well. So accountability is the key issue. As a conservative, I believe in local control, but I've seen instances where the local control really we have to have some reining in. For instance, the bill that I sponsored, capping how much school districts can hold over in fund balance cap. We found out that Arkansas school districts had $800 million just sitting in the bank. So there's one of the issues where accountability needs to step in. The money's already there for many of these districts. They've just not been spending it directly on the situations that would help benefit students.
Let's get into one of the biggest issues that the legislature has been debating now, and that's school safety, just how to keep these kids safe when they are trying to learn. And so, Mark, I know you're a co-chair of a committee that started analyzing different aspects of it in JPR.
Right.
And so now you've heard from both sides of the debate. And so what sort of plans are you comfortable with now potentially that could inspire legislation in 2019?
Well, we're certainly looking at the issue of being able to better identify students who are at risk, those who would be a risk to themselves or risk to the other students. And so we want to better make that information available to all those that are engaged in the process. That would include school resource officers who right now in some cases are limited from being able to have that information, not so that they can single out the students for any kind of disciplinary action, but so that they can actually interact with them. The research or the presentation we heard recently about advocating against school resource officers or arming teachers really isn't borne out by the statistics. The state of Texas has 170 school districts that has allowed teachers voluntarily to be armed, and in none of those cases over the last 10 years have there been active shooter situations. So we feel like that there's a hybrid of approaches that we can take. It's not just about hardening targets, it's also about how can we reach out to these students that are absolutely, I mean, they're troubled for whatever reason, and we want to be able to effectuate that as well.
Monica, what would you like to see the legislature do if elected? I mean, some of your fellow Democrats have already put legislation that they've drafted in front of their colleagues about a red flag law and then raising the age to 21 to buy an assault weapon.
Okay, well, first of all, back to what Mark was talking about and putting, you know, taking a look at the kids. And mental health is a big deal coming into this. And part of the problem, schools, their funds have been cut to where they do not have enough counselors for the number of students that they serve. So that's the first thing I would propose. You know, if you want to put boots on the ground, do it with counselors in the schools so that they can know the students well and know those who need help and maybe head off potential crises. Secondly, the red flag laws. I support that because I just don't think that people that have made threats and are dangerous to themselves or to others, because that's really where most gun deaths come from, you know, is suicides and that over and above homicides even. But people that have indicated that they are a threat, then we should be able to take their weapons away from them at least temporarily until that passes and they need to get the help that they need for mental health, you know, which comes down to a health care issue.
Mark, would you support the red flag law that Senator Bond and Representative
Well,
Ledding?
as we heard in testimony, Representative Ledding and Senator Bond both pointed out that there were a number of things that would have to be worked out. There were eventualities that were brought up by committee members that they had not taken into consideration. So I think it's something that is worth a discussion like we had the other day. There's some that pro-gun folks that just thought that we shouldn't have entertained that. I disagree with that. I think anytime that we can have an open conversation about possible solutions, do it in a civil way, that's going to be best for our kids and it's going to be best for our state. So I think moving forward, it is a debate that should continue.
Okay. And then just since you both were former educators, I know that the state is not working to require teachers to be armed, but would you carry a gun in a classroom setting?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I am just adamantly opposed to introducing guns into the school setting. I mean, that's a disaster waiting to happen. You know, I taught at Parkview, Arts and Science Magnet High School while I was there. Things that were stolen included, well, there was no place you could lock anything up that it would not be stolen. Anything of value, no matter where you put it. Desk drawer, closet, whatever, it could be stolen. Second of all, I mean, an entire computer lab was stolen. So, you know, I just don't think that it's wise to introduce guns. Students that are entertaining using them are going to find a way to get them. You know, and if they're not there, they can't get them. I would advocate that we need more school resource officers. You know, I'm not opposed to protecting children, you know, but we need to have trained personnel that are trained in handling firearms, not teachers that went out and, you know, got a few hours of training that then they will have to repeat, you know, to keep up the certification, in addition to the 60 hours of staff development that they're also required to do each year. So I just don't think that we need to be putting one more thing on teachers' plates and then also, you know, threatening their retirement and, you know, not adequately paying them for the job they're already doing. That's just too much. It's a bridge too far.
Well, I've taught in higher education, and I've been in classroom situations where I'm on a second or third floor, and there's only one way in, one way out. I don't know that I necessarily myself would want to carry a weapon, but I would like to know that one of my faculty members, one of my colleagues down the hall, if they heard an active shooter situation, that they would be able to respond before the active shooter absolutely empties their clip, maybe even several clips, on the students and myself, where we would not even be able to escape. So I think that in a voluntary situation where there's adequate training, more than adequate training is what we have seen actually, I think it is a course of action that we should certainly debate, and we look towards as a way of being able to protect our students and harden our targets.
Two legislative committees, they recently met to review the state's two largest retirement systems, and that's of course the teacher and then public employees. And I know that co-chair Representative Doug House, he stressed that he and the rest of his colleagues for that matter, you know, they have no plans to merge the systems or create 401k program for their members. But Monica, you were in the crowd. What made you go to the meeting that day, or the 2 days?
Well, a lot of current teachers and retired teachers have been alarmed about some of the moves that have been going on. And it's just curious why we would be calling in the Pew Foundation to do a stress test when both of those systems already do their own stress test. That usually seems to proceed in other states where there have been takeovers of public retirement systems. That's one of the first steps. So you can understand why people would be alarmed when they see that coming to Arkansas.
Mark, you're one of the co-chairs of the committee, so can you respond to that a little bit?
Sure. Well, in November, according to new accounting principles, stress testing is going to be required of the retirement systems anyway. One of the things that did come out in the testimony was that there is a minimum standard of stress testing, and then there is stress testing that can be done where you look at as many as 1,000 different variables. The testimony that we heard, I believe, was more of an advocacy of let's just not do the bare minimum. If we're going to best protect retirees and those who are currently paying into the system, we want to look at all possible scenarios, and if that means that you have 1,000 different models that are going to look at contribution levels, going to be looking at COLAs, going to be looking at all types of situations, we may as well go ahead and do that very thorough review. I would say that unequivocally, I am opposed to merging the systems. These hearings had nothing to do with that. It had nothing to do with any kind of a money grab. As a matter of fact, what it is, it's our proper oversight of making sure that what has been promised to retirees and those who've paid in the system get what they have been promised. And we want to make sure that that is done off into perpetuity, frankly. And we've been, one of the issues that we're concerned about is that the 29-year amortization schedule of paying off the unfunded liabilities just keeps getting pushed off. Each year it becomes 29, 29, 29. We believe that there ought to be some type, and this is where the modeling would come in, is to tell us how can we go about and paying off those unfunded liabilities so that the systems are protected, paying them off sooner rather than later.
Mark, you mentioned something at the beginning of our interview that I wanted to circle back on, and that's voter ID.
Yes.
Just because you did sponsor legislation to reinstate it here in Arkansas, voters first had to try it out in May for the primaries, and now they're going to have to do it in November when you two are on the ballot. So as that's being rolled out and everything, what have you thought about it?
Well, it actually was rolled out in some special elections last fall.
Sure.
Again, in the May primary, there have been just anecdotal examples that I've heard. There's not anyone been saying that people have been turned away, that they've been disenfranchised. As a matter of fact, one of the provisions that I put into the law was that if you did not have your ID, for whatever reason, you could sign an affidavit or a sworn statement attesting that you are who you say you are. Well, that keeps people from being disenfranchised. And so the polling that's come out recently seems to mirror the national polling that Gallup has done. Gallup says 80% of Americans support voter ID. In Arkansas, it's 71%, with 8 not having an opinion. There's only 20% that oppose, and included in that number are my opponent, who has criticized me for my support of voter ID.
So, yeah, what's your take on it? What do you think that the state should do instead? Should they...
I think it was unnecessary. I think that it was something that was devised to address a problem that didn't exist. You know, we don't have widespread voter fraud. How many cases of voter fraud did we have in the 2016 election? 2? You know, so we create something, you know, that is an additional hoop that people have to jump through to be able to vote. And it's unnecessary. It was based on the premise that, you know, all these people were fraudulently voting twice, whatever. You know, that is just simply not true. You know, we have real problems in Arkansas that need to be addressed, and I just don't believe that that was one of them.
I wanted to ask you too about ethics too. So we've of course seen a handful of current and former lawmakers implicated in recent scandals, namely the Rusty Cranford case. And so it is of course renewed calls for ethics reform, and then also as well kind of added support for these tighter term limits. So I know that the Senate right now, they're working on their own rule overhaul for their chamber. The House is yet to introduce a plan. And so Monica, we can start with you. What kind of changes would you like to see moving forward in terms of ethics?
I would like to see more teeth in the ethics standards that are already set, because when someone continually violates the same ethics standard repeatedly and just makes no attempt to correct that, then you know, what's the point? You know, there needs to be some sort of penalty or oversight amongst the House members of their own, so that when somebody is not following the ethics code, then something more happens than just say, don't do that again, and they just keep on doing it anyway.
And then Mark, there was legislation that Democrats tried to push recently that you voted against. So would you support ethics legislation moving forward? What would you like to see in terms of ethics?
Well, I think the main thing that has been identified through all of these various scandals have been the conflicts of interest. Mm-hmm. And that extrapolates many times to situations of legislators who are attorneys, and their law firms are able to receive retainers, but they don't have to report that they receive retainer from a group. I don't think the rules go far enough in saying that a member only has to identify that they have a potential conflict of interest, because then they could still go ahead and participate. I think that they should have to recuse both from discussion and from voting. And I've raised this issue in the House. We have a seldom used, probably never used rule that says that if you have a conflict, if you have a financial conflict, you cannot vote. Well, in education, for instance, we have had a significant conflict with Representative John Walker in his litigation, millions of dollars in legal fees over the DSEG case, and yet he is able to participate in all of our discussions, many times be obstructionist in some of those discussions. And I just don't think it's enough for us to know that there's that conflict. The members should have to sit out any conversation that has anything to do with the area that they have the conflict in.
Another topic I wanted to make sure we got into is abortion. Arkansas has some of the most restrictive anti-abortion laws in the nation. If elected, Monica, you would be the first woman to fill this seat. And so also as a Democrat, would it be a priority for you to push back on some of these laws?
Let me just say that I think that it's important that medical abortion remain safe, legal, and rare. And the bottom line is that the decisions, the informed decisions regarding a woman's pregnancy should be made by the woman regarding her own pregnancy and not by politicians.
And then Mark, you've voted for some of these anti-abortion laws, and do you expect to see more restrictions moving forward? And then how do you think that the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation battle has potentially increased the Arkansas GOP's resolve to maybe ban abortion altogether?
Well, I've supported all of the pro-life legislation, and I'm proud that I've recently received the endorsement of Arkansas Right to Life in this election because of that stand. I think it's extremely unfortunate the way that the hearings came down. I believe Justice Kavanaugh, when he says that he is not going to say that he passes a litmus test of whether he is pro-abortion or he's pro-choice, and that it is inappropriate to force the justice candidate to be able to answer those questions. I don't believe that just because of those hearings we're going to see a stronger push towards an absolute ban. However, the Supreme Court has said that provisions related to abortion are left to the individual states. And I think that we have done that responsibly in the state of Arkansas, and I've been proud to support every one of those proposals.
And be sure to catch Capitol View on the air Sunday mornings at 8:30 on KARK right before Meet the Press.